So I've selected the templates that come the closest to my sections that will serve well. And I've spun them on, and then I've lifted them all the way up, because what I'm going to do next is to rough in the hammer line. Okay, now I'm going to go up, and we'll now set our actual samples. Now the samples are the filed hammers, so that helps us to see what we're doing. Okay, so this clearly has to come down. Even more. Let's check out the other side, because this is it's a seesaw. That is almost perfect as it happens, but of course it may change when we fine tune this one. Yeah, it's a bit of a seesaw. Let's see. That could come down a little bit. That's still about right. Okay, so it's trial and error. And because there is a seesaw effect, but it's no big deal to go back and forth a little bit. And then you end up with something that is very accurate. And as you can see what a small increment it is sensitive to. And I just do that for the rest. And then we have actual accurate strike. My next step is going to be to put on the shanks I'm going to use. And that will give me their center pins. And I'm going to back this up over the center pins and have a measurement of strike height from, well, it's the bore length is what it is. It's from the crown of the hammer as it's striking the string down to where it's bored. And a byproduct of that is when the hammer strikes the string, the shank is parallel to the key bit. And it just optimizes its strength and control and bounce and so forth. The keys and key frame are going off for new bushings and new key tops. And I need to take measurements before they go in order to be able to prepare and hang the hammers and be ready when they come back to proceed. So there are some measurements that I need to take, and I'll show you a few of them and how I go about it. Okay, first one is going to be the distance from, see if I can get you so you can see, from the hammer center to strike. Now, there are a couple of ways to do this. This template is exactly 3 inches tall. It's got a very slight slant, but not enough to really materially affect that measurement. So one way is to go from the top of the template to the center of the bushing. And I read out to the nearest hundredth because for all practical purposes, drawing that on tails, which is what I'm going to do, and trimming exactly to the nearest hundredth is challenging, and to the nearest thousandths is, beyond my capabilities, and really is kind of moot, because at the end of the day, the hammers get worn, and compressible materials in the system sag or compress and rub against each other, and the whole thing changes far more than 1/100 of an inch. But I just want a place that is relatively correct. In the set of hammers, they are calibrated, in theory, from that center to strike. Well, strike height changes. It's not just, there isn't just a base height and a treble height in a grand piano. I haven't met one yet that was exactly that way. There are some that are closer, but a typical Steinway has a curve to it. Now that may be, and I think it is, because of the way cast iron plates cool, takes on a warp. It's actually a warp in a favorable direction. But if you only measure hammer number 1 for the bore of hammer number 1 and number 88, all those in between aren't quite right. And also, your regulation won't be quite right. So it forces additional compromise into a system that already is having a hard time being consistent. So my feeling is that if I can get a bore distance to the nearest 100th and do them all with the same procedure, if they're a little bit longer or a little bit shorter, so be it. But at least they'll be in the right shape, so my regulation will come out even throughout. Because if my bore distance accommodates this extra loft in the strike out here, then the distance of the shanks over the rest cushions will be the same throughout. And other factors will be less compromised. So anyway, so one system is to measure from the top of this to the bottom of that, and for the bore distance, you subtract 3 inches. Okay, well, I find that a more accurate way of boring hammers is to bore from the tail. And if all the tails are the same length relative to the bore, and I use 1 inch to be that dimension, then you bore from the tail, which is wood rather than felt, and you get a more accurate result. Right. So there's a little bit of math here in that you've got 1 inch of tail. You're going to measure this overall distance and subtract 2 inches from it, and that will give you the length of the hammer from the bottom of the tail to the crown. And that's the length I'm going to draw on the tails and then cut the tails down to that size. And then when I do my bore from the tail, I have one setup in terms of length. Obviously, in terms of flare, it shifts as to the specs for the piano, but for length, they're all the same length. I'm putting in new back checks. All the new back checks will go to the same length. That is not the way Steinway did it originally. They had their compromises in a different disposition and still do. They have a longer tail in the bass and the shortest tail in the high treble. And I sort of agree with that. In terms of weight, you want the least weight in the high treble. But taper does a lot of that anyway. And the difference in tail weight in the tail is rather small per increment. Because the keys and keyframe are going away, I want to do my measurements from the new shank center. They may or may not be exactly the same as the ones that are coming off. And I want to have, the new shank center to strike be the bore distance of the hammers. And so that is why I've changed out my samples. And in this middle one, I've taken an extra shank away so that I can get to the center and take my measurement. And please like, subscribe, or follow the link in the notes to my website.